Okay, so let me work that out right now. And we will pretend that this recording got everything earlier, right? Yeah, got everything. Okay, so let's take it over here. Let's compose. Anybody else? I'm sending an email right now specifically to Matt and Julia with that link.
I got it.
Look at that. Doreen's on top of it. I'm glad you're receiving my emails, Doreen. Okay, I just sent that off to Matt and Julia. And I'm recording and everything's going well here. All right. So the Canadian Organic Grower book, the first thing it'll ask you to do is to set your financial goals. And maybe I should get out of here. I want this to be available to me. So let's leave that there. And then let's go back over here. And let's get into our on-farm crop planning. Okay, so the first step the Canadian Organic Grower book will ask you to do is set your financial goals. And you're welcome to have that book open there, that PDF open, and follow along with the book as well. And there are I think at least 2 hard copies of that book that exist in the Hayes Farm Library if somebody's interested in taking one of those home. I know I like to read a tactile book in bed instead of a computer screen. So here we have our financial goals in this section. Ignore everything else on this screen for the time being. Here in this section, we have our financial goals for our gardens this year. And our gross retail targets that we're aiming for in harvest is $35,000 worth of vegetables. Now, that's not to say we sell a lot of the things that we do here at a pay what you can basis. So that's not to say that we're actually going to achieve $35,000 in like cash in our pocket. But that is our target. So if we, and I do have prices associated to all of our crops, either by the bunch, by the pound, by the pint, by the quart, whatever it happens to be for that particular crop, I have prices associated with it. And by the time we're done adding up all of our prices for all of our various harvests around here, our target is $35,000 worth of produce. Now, that being said, last year, our target was $30,000. And we sold by the time everything was said and done, we achieved just under $35,000 worth of gross sales target produce. Our target last year again was 30,000, but in reality, at the end of it all, we overshot that and got, I think it was like $34,500 worth of produce. So our target this year is 35,000, which is only $500 higher than last year. But I think in reality, what I'm really in my heart shooting for is $40,000 here. But if we achieve that 35,000, I'll be happy. Now, as I was saying, we sell a lot of things here at the farm on a pay what you can basis. So we might not actually get $35,000 in our pocket. But we have various external funders at this here farm that at the end of the year, we're able to say, hey, you know, this is how much we harvested. This is how much we netted. And then some of these organizations that we work with that are like anti-poverty type organizations, they actually have topped us up in the past to make sure that we achieved our sales target that we're trying to do. Which is super interesting. It's a super interesting business model to me that we are actually letting people choose their own prices to pay. And then at the end of it all, we have organizations that respect what we do and then top us up to where we should be. And I think that's a really interesting business model. I'm very happy with that one at the moment. So this $35,000, that is our target. How that's going to break down is we have our CSA program. We have a little bit of no, we don't have any wholesale. We have our CSA program. Wholesale set at 0, as you can see. Restaurant sales is set at 0. There is a market that happens weekly at the Fredericton Library downtown on Carlton Street. And it's called Market Greens. It is run by the Greater Fredericton Society, GFSI is their acronym, Greater Fredericton Social Innovation, perhaps is their acronym. And they run this Market Greens, and we are going to supply them with produce. We are aiming to supply them with about $100 a week of retail priced produce over 20 weeks, and that's where we get this $2,000 figure. And then our farm gate sales. When we have open farm days, we set up a table of produce and this and that, and we're aiming to make about $3,000 from farm gate sales this year. And when you add up, oh, well, okay, and another thing I wanted to point out is our CSA is broken down to various categories, we'll call them. We have a 30 share CSA. We make 30 shares available on a complete pay what you can basis to partner organizations such as Under One Sky, the Multicultural Association. Youth in Transition was another one. We might be working with AIDS New Brunswick this year too. And so these organizations identify folks that don't necessarily have access to fresh organic produce, and then we make it available to them on a pay what you can basis. So those partner organizations help us find 30 people to work with and to provide vegetables for. Then we also make available 15 full price shares for folks that can afford it. And those are mostly just kind of community members local to this area, give or take. And then we also make available 15 pay what you can shares for people to come pick up directly from Hayes Farm. And so that's the breakdown there. Half of our shares are going to partner organizations, and half the shares we sell ourselves. And out of the half that we sell ourselves, half of them pay full price and half of them are pay what you can. So altogether, our CSA, as you can see, makes up the bulk of all of our sales. It makes up like $30,000 out of $35,000 of our sales is just our CSA. And then the other $5,000 is broken down to that Market Greens and then our open farm day sales. So that's our first step, is we just set our target sales for the year. Now, if you were doing this at home for, say, your for-profit entrepreneurial small-scale market garden operation, this is going back to our spreadsheet literacy class. This is a great reason why you want to know how expensive it is to maintain your lifestyle. Because if you know that you need to have, like, let's see, achieve $20,000 worth of net sales in order for you to pocket $20,000 in your pocket in order for you to live your lifestyle that you want to live, then you got to work that into here. And we're not going to get too hard into the numbers right now. That actually comes later in the season for our 30-week participants. Our 18-week participants end at the end of August, as you guys know. And our 30-week participants go all the way to November. And in that time from September to November, we're going to spend a lot of time doing this crop planning process, and we're going to develop your own personal crop plan. But today is just the overview. Yeah, the first step here is setting those income targets. I see a chat flashing, so I'm checking that out. Oh, all right. Tom and Ursula are out. And that's fine. Okay, so our first step here is setting those income targets. And here at the farm, we set that 35,000. Oh, that's where I was going with that is when you know, say, that you need to make for yourself $20,000 take home in order to maintain the lifestyle that you want to live. Your farm, then, I would recommend your farm needs to make around $40,000 to $60,000 total, because that $20,000 is going to end up in your pocket in theory at the end of the year. And then that remaining money, that $20,000 to $40,000, depends on where you set your sales targets, is going to be used to invest in your farm, in your inputs and cost of running your farm. There's various ways you can figure out those percentages, and we won't get into that now, but if you are curious, we can get into that 101 or later in the semester, as I was saying, for the 30-week people. But if you're an entrepreneur, that's a great reason to keep track of all of your budgets and whatnot and figure out how expensive it is to be you. If you, going back to my example, if you wanted to pocket and go home at the end of the year with $20,000 in your pocket from your farm operation, you're probably looking at trying to gross around $40,000 to $60,000 in order to net that $20,000 in your pocket. I know I'm talking all fancy bookkeeping terms. Watch out. So that's the very first step in the Canadian organic grower, is setting those financial goals. Hayes Farm financial goal for this year is $35,000. I'm about to move on to the second step here. Is there any questions with the first step, setting those financial goals?
Mark, I was wondering, did you track, like, where you have pay what you can? Did you track like the average of what people pay? Like, did you find it was close to cost, or were some people like barely managing like a donation? Or I'm just interested.
Yep. Overall, we find it's usually about half. And so here I have, this is what I was trying to draw your attention to, but over here is what I have that we would actually expect. And so with our partner organizations, we expect to grow and provide them with $15,000 worth of veg, but we are really expecting about half of that back. With our full price CSAers, we are expecting all of it back because they're full price. With our Hayes Farm Pay What You Can, we got that at half. Market greens, same thing. We will set them up with $2,000 worth of vegetables, but they will probably pay us half. The Farm Gate Pay What You Can. The interesting thing about the Farm Gate Pay What You Can is we have a diverse range of humans here, and some folks deliberately overpay because they like what we do, and some folks pay what they can. And at the end of the day, it almost always adds up, and it's so fascinating to me.
Well, I was wondering with that, like, I know you do that for the like walk-in days, but did you guys ever explore having like full price share folks being like, do you want to top up to $5 a week to cover other costs? Or have you, like, does that work? Or
I don't know. I've seen a lot of CSAs try to explore that.
yeah,
I don't know of too many that have really made that work for them. I think we've had this conversation in previous Hayes Farm meetings, and we try to direct those kind of folks to make a donation to our crowdfund. And in the end, it all kind of helps keep us run.
cool.
Any other budgety related questions? Oh, here's our CSA breakdown, by the way. We're looking at 60 shares, $25 value shares per week. Going to run that program for 20 weeks, which means 20 times 25 gets us a total share value of $500 per person per share. We're all together, we're looking to gross $30,000 worth of vegetables that way. But our total estimated net is about half of that.
So
In
they
our
pay
time-
their share every year?
I'm sorry?
So every year they pay a $500 share?
Well, with the CSA program, typically how CSAs are supposed to work is all of your CSA members are supposed to pay full price before the season even begins. And that's amazing because then that's when all the farmers' expenses are, right? You're always buying your seeds early in the year, your fertilizers early in the year, and you're going into debt. So if your CSA members are paying ahead of time, that works out amazingly well. But then you have an obligation. Say if all of our CSA members all paid us full price at the beginning of the part of the season, that means I'm owing $30,000 of vegetables to everybody. That's a bit of stress, and that's the way CSAs work. It is a little bit of stress on the farmers, but by having your crop plan in place, I'm able to lay that stress aside. Keep in mind, I was organizing a CSA for up to 300 people in Toronto at one time, and that's a lot of stress. Any other questions about budgeting and CSAs? All right, I'm moving on to this next step, which is deciding your crops. So now we just decided our price. We just decided how much money our farm is going to gross. I'm going to close that window. Nope, wrong one now. We just decided how much money our farm is going to gross. Now in your next step, you're deciding on your, well, basically your goods and services. So a farm, our farm doesn't have much in the way of services, but a farm certainly could have services. You could have a big old fancy pants tractor, and then you could do custom plowing on for your neighbors and your neighboring community, and that could be a service your farm offers. But in this case, our farm doesn't offer any services. We just offer goods. So here in the next step, you are listing all of your goods and services. And in Hayes Farm case, we just have goods, and also setting prices and units to them. So here we have all of the various vegetables that we're growing at Hayes Farm. And if you see, that goes all the way down to number 60. That's like 60 different things we're growing at this farm, which is crazy, right? But keep in mind, these are broken down, like tomatoes take up 3 lines in and of themselves. We got beefsteak, cherry, and paste tomatoes. So I mean, technically you could count tomatoes as one thing. But we got it broken down into 3. Likewise, we got radish broken down to spring radish versus winter radish. And peppers, there's a couple of categories for peppers, 3 categories for peppers. But if you're to break everything down and whatnot, the way it is, we are growing like about basically 60 varieties of crops and vegetables here at the farm. And we also have things in here too to point out, like sunflowers and tobacco, that aren't exactly like for sale items, and that's why there's no money associated with them. There's just things I like to grow here on the farm and gift at that too to folks. So anyway, first step was all about setting the budget. Second step is all about deciding on your goods and services, and deciding on your units for your goods and services, and then deciding on prices per unit for those goods and services. If I had services on here, such as custom plowing is often done by like an hourly rate, or sometimes by the kilometer rate. They'll set one of those odometers on your tractor, and you can charge somebody based on the row, like the kilometers that you've plowed. So that could be another category. Or if you had another service, such as an agritourism event on your farm, that could be another service. And then you could have like per person, I charge $5 to get into my corn maze. And that could be another service you would have here listed. But anyway, your first step is all about setting your gross budget, a target. And then your second step is all about identifying your goods and services, setting units for your goods and services, and then setting prices for your goods and services. Any questions on that one? Pretty straightforward.
For price, like, where do you have something that you refer to that's kind of like a yearly thing, or do you just kind of know what it costs generally? Like, I imagine you want to be kind of,
well, I'm outdated, I'll admit it. So when I first moved out to NB, I was all used to like Toronto farmer market prices. And I reduced them in 2018. All of my, like, in my head, working at farmers market for the last 15 years, I have all these prices in my head. Then moving out to NB in 2018, I went with those prices and I took them down just a little bit. But now, just in a short amount of time, I find what I used to charge at Toronto Farmer Market in 2017 is too low for even this area. The price of vegetables are sure going up lately at the grocery store. And I always have to constantly check back in at the grocery store to see if I'm on target and where I'm at. And nowadays, with everybody being online, that's super easy. Once upon a time, I used to be a clipboard guy in the grocery store, and I used to literally be going around, and then people would come and ask me questions about produce because they're like, oh, because they thought I worked there. I'm like, no, I don't work here. I'm just that weird guy with the clipboard.
That's amazing.
But nowadays, everything's online, so it's super easy to figure out. At the end of the season, I do an exercise where I total up all of my different produce and all the different prices that we charge for it. Average that all out, and then I will compare prices with like the lowest, cheapest place I can find, which is often Walmart conventional. And then I will also compare with like organics from Loblaws or like the Independent or Superstore. That's what they call it around these parts. And I will compare with the high-end organic prices at places like that, and I will find out where I fit in. And for the last couple of years, I have the prices that we charge at Hayes Farm has been less than that high-end retail organics, but more than that Walmart conventional produce. And nothing wrong with Walmart conventional produce. I don't want to disparage it. It feeds people, and that's a good thing. But I think we have way, way better quality than Walmart conventional produce, and we have way, way better quality than organic from Loblaws too. But our prices come in between the two, and that's my sweet spot. And I like to be there. And actually, as a matter of fact, on this page, my prices I might have updated. So that's my proposed my goods and services, my units, and my pricing. The next step in the Canadian Organic Grower book will get you to start setting your sales targets. And I'm thinking I might have actually raised my prices from that last sheet to this sheet. I got the stuff hidden. Yeah, I did. So the prices that I just had up, and of course I closed that. These prices that I just had up on this page, these were actually my 2020 prices. And then I decided, we had a meeting with Hayes Farm team, and we decided that we were going to raise our prices by 25% across the board in order to keep up with rising prices in the grocery store. Now, keep in mind, of course, we offer our pay what you can stuff, but we feel as if it's important to reflect the actual price a grower needs for things. Even though we allow people to pay what they can, we like to be able to list the price and say, you know, a grower actually needs, actually in this case it was $6, and that's cheaper, so I don't know what's going on there. Anyway, we like to post prices saying, you know, this is what a grower actually needs in order to be sustainable, and we will allow you to pay what you can, but we feel as if it's in everybody's best interest to set out those prices. Therefore, if somebody is at the farmer's market and you see an organic fruit or vegetable grower and they're selling their stuff and you're surprised by the price, like those prices are often actually the prices that seem high at farmers markets. Like those farms aren't making a killing. They're not showing up there in Mercedes-Benz, you know, and even though you can pick up a tomato at a farmer's market and that tomato could be worth like just $4 for like a single tomato, I can tell you like people aren't getting like rich off of it for sure. Like a lot of organic farmers are just kind of getting by. And so even though the prices might seem a little bit high, I think the problem is that the conventional prices are so low, it makes the local organic guys seem high. But I think it's in our best interest to list our prices of like what's fair, and then we let people pay what they can.
For Hayes Farm, what's the most profitable vegetable that you guys sell?
An excellent question. That takes me on a diversion. Hang on to that. Let's go visit that. At the end of the year, I pulled together all of my numbers. This is 2020 numbers, because obviously we don't have numbers from 2021. We harvested, there's my full retail value of stuff. I said 34,500. I lied. It's $34,374.66 is what our total retail value of produce that we harvested at Hayes Farm in 2020.
How dare you lie to us?
Right, which is just over 10,000 pounds of vegetables here at Hayes Farm, for all fruits and vegetables, mostly vegetables. The top 5 crops that we harvested by weight were carrots, and then winter squash, and potatoes, and onions, and then tomatoes. We grew a lot of tomatoes in our hoop house last year. And you can see like by weight, those are like heavier crops, of course. And then the top 5 crops by retail value is our greens. All of our greens combined as our chard, spinach, kale, salad mixes, Asian greens, just the greens in general was our top retail value. Beans were second, fresh and dry, then garlic, then winter squash, and then tomatoes. Doreen, you got something?
Yes, well, different towns and different places have what you call a different in our area, everybody does pickling, okay? So everybody's looking for pickling cucumbers or the big cucumbers for Lady Ashburn, and they do a lot of pickling stuff, right? So like if for different areas, you got to find out what they want, like what's the demand in the vegetables that they're buying.
You're absolutely right. And that kind of takes us down another avenue. And when we start talking about sales, and we will get into sales a little bit here, Your best bet for sales in general is knowing your community and building a community and engaging with that community. And it sounds like you're already doing that, Doreen. If you already know what people are looking for, that's exactly what I'm talking about when I talk about like trying to engage with your local community. It'll do you no good to grow something that is extremely high-end things that, like, let's say edible flowers, and then go sell them in a place where they're looking for pickling cucumbers. You're not going to make any money. At one time when I was growing edible flowers and selling them to fancy pants chefs in Toronto, that was very lucrative. That was a very good thing for me to do. It all depends on your community. And that's the best thing you can possibly do in the sales department, is build that community. That's that culture part of agriculture. And every farm needs to be a busy spot full of lots of humans. That's what I say. Okay, I'm going to jump back over to 2021. And we were looking at our sales projections. So our first step was all about setting that budget. Our second step was all about deciding on our goods and services, setting our units, and setting our prices. Now in the third step, you're setting your sales projections. So in that very first step, we already took a step towards this. Because we decided that we were going to sell through a CSA program, through that market greens program, and through our on-farm farm gate kind of sales. So here in this step, now that we have our crops selected and we have our unit selected and our price selected, we now try to decide, and I'm going to look at this one. Now we decide what's going to go into our CSA box weekly. We're also going to decide what's going to go to market greens weekly. And we're also going to decide what we want to sell at the farm gate for our farm gate sales. And we got to make sure all of our numbers, by the time we're done this step, all add up to our target budget number of $35,000. So here on this screen, we are deciding what goes in one CSA box for every week of our CSA program. Across the top of this spreadsheet, we have weeks 1 all the way to week 20. So that's our CSA program. We're running our CSA program for 20 weeks, beginning on July 7th is the first box, all the way to mid-November, November 17th. And on this sheet, we have all of our crops listed. So here we're kind of going virtual shopping here, and we are deciding what's going to go into our CSA box on week 1. And of course, you have to know your seasonality. You need to know what's in season in order to decide what's going to go in that CSA box. You can't be putting winter squash into your CSA box on July 7th because they're simply not going to be ready. So you need to have some sort of idea of seasonality. And if that intimidates you right now, don't worry, just hang on. And throughout the season here at Hayes Farm, you'll get a good idea of what's in season when. There are seasonality charts available, of course, online. You probably could even find one just specifically for New Brunswick or probably the Maritimes, but they exist. There are seasonality charts. And as a matter of fact, and you guys have access to all of this, by the way, in your crop, in your crop planning folder, in that on-farm folder. This here is a list of seasonal stuff of when it was harvestable in 2020. This is all the harvest in 2020. I have 2021 listed here because this is when I'm thinking about when it's going to be harvestable this year. Starting from the very first week of CSA, because our CSA last year in 2020 also started on it started on July 8th last year. And this year we're starting on July 7th, but July 8th is when it started last year. And this is what we were harvesting on July 8th. So I keep these notes for myself year to year to let me know what we were harvesting on any given week throughout our CSA last year, because then that influences what I'm going to put in the CSA at this year. I know what's going to be harvestable and what's seasonal. So this here, very first sheet where it says Hayes Farm 2020 harvests are all what we harvested every single week of the growing season throughout the growing season. So that's something that's available for you online for your reference for seasonality. Now going back to this one here, here is our CSA box list. And here we are deciding what's going to go into our CSA box. And here I decided, early July, based on my notes from last year, garlic scapes should be harvestable. And we are going to give everybody one bunch of garlic scapes in their box. And so out of a $25 value, We are now up to $2.50 because we're going to put one bunch of garlic scapes on and we're going to charge $2.50 for it. Next, I have decided I'm going to put chard in their box, and one bunch of chard is going to be worth $4. So now our box is up to $6.50. Another item is basil. Our greenhouse basil is ready as soon as early July, or it was last year, and I'm hoping it's going to be ready again this year in early July. One bunch of basil is going to cost you $2.50, and I think I'm up to $8.50 now in my box. And you go through and you add all these various items based on seasonality, based on your prices. And here I got 2 pieces of kohlrabi, 2 pieces of head lettuce, 1 bunch of spring onion, half a pound of peas per share, 1 bunch of radish. And by the time I'm done adding it up, I want to make sure that my box exceeds that $25 value. I would rather have just a little bit of overage than underage. Underage sucks. A little bit of overage, then you have extra that you can either give to your crew or you can make available for another sale in another way. So every single week of the CSA box, I want to make sure I am over and above my $25. And so that was an example of week 1 of CSA, what's going to go in week 1 box. And then I go through every single week of the growing season here. In week 2, I decided I'm going to supply them with some raspberry, some spring radish, some peas, some more spring onion, and so on. And throughout the entire growing season, I am deciding what's going to go into their box for every single given week. And then here at the bottom, I got to make darn sure that I have surpassed that $25 value. Because again, I'd rather have a little bit of surplus and then as opposed to the other way around. And sometimes I even go so high as have $35 value. And again, I'd rather plan for more than plan for less. Look at that formula way up here. Do you guys see that? It's crazy. That's the formula. Isn't that crazy? I created that formula myself, but I only created it once and then I copy and paste every single year. And so likewise, this is available to you. If you ever wanted to go down this crop planning process, whether it's for a for-profit operation or just for your own homestead house to feed your family of 5, that's my situation. I do the same kind of process. I plan out what I want to harvest every single week of the growing season, so my family has food available that I don't have to go to the grocery store to buy. And you end up with this huge formula at the bottom. But again, you only have to set up that formula once. And then after it's set up once, everything is just cutting and pasting from there on. And so by the time I'm done with my CSA box, I go scroll all the way over this way. And remember, if we're looking at $25 value per week times 20-week season, that gives us $500 of produce per share that we need to supply people. And here I have it overestimated at $614. And that's another thing about CSAs. Yes, people are signing up and expecting $25 worth of produce per week. But as a farmer, I want to give them just a little bit more every week because they were so nice to give me this money when I needed that money full price early in the growing season, that when it comes to them picking up their vegetables, I want to exceed their $25 value per week just by a little bit. I'll usually aim for about $27 per week. And then by the end of the growing season, they have actually received basically around $40 of extra vegetables that they didn't pay for. But that's just my way of saying thanks for supporting us and thanks for paying your money at the beginning part of the season. And thanks for going on this journey with us. So this here CSA list then adds up above and beyond that 500. And that's a good thing. You always want to shoot for a little bit extra, not too little, a little bit extra. And so here I have, by the time I'm done adding it all up, I am overshooting from $500 all the way to $614 or $615, we can call it. And also on this last column, it's adding up my entire total units per share. So by the end of the year, my CSA customers should be receiving close to 30 pounds of potatoes per share, about 13 pounds of squash per share, about 9 pieces of summer squash, and so on and so forth. And that's per box. That's what they're receiving per box. So that is the first piece of this step. The second piece, because this here only adds up, this here only represents one box. So if I'm doing 60 shares, my next step is to take all of those numbers and then multiply them by 60. And again, this here is a bit of cutting and pasting. You just got to set up this formula here once, and then you just click and drag your box all the way down, and then it self auto figures the rest of your formulas. We won't get into that too much about how to do that now. But this here sheet all takes those individual 1 shares and multiplies it all by 60. So here on July 21st, well, let's look at our first sheet. July 21st for beans, we're looking to set them up with a ½ pound per share, and a ½ pound per share times 60 shares gives you 30 pounds of beans. So this here sheet, this CSA sheet 2 multiplies, I should have put 2 up, multiplies all of our individual shares by 60 to let you know how much total poundage or bunches or units that you need per week to service the entire CSA. And likewise, at the end, it all adds up. So with beans, we are looking to harvest a total, or grow and harvest a total of over 400 pounds of beans for our CSA program. Likewise, let's go with something like garlic. We're looking to harvest a total of 660 pieces to service our entire CSA program. And that's what this spreadsheet all does, is pull together all of your CSA numbers. And then here at the bottom, likewise, I got them all totaled up for every individual week and then total for the entire season. So that's our CSA. That's planning for your CSA. Likewise, for market greens, we are going to set them up. We are aiming to set them up from on July 21st with 5 pounds of beans and continuing with 5 pounds of beans all the way to September. We're also looking to set them up with carrot, 5 bunch per week from August 4th all the way to the end of November or mid-November. Cucumbers, we're looking to set them up with 5 pieces per week from July into September, and so on and so forth. You'll notice on this sheet is set up exactly the same as my last sheet, but I've only filled in the numbers that I am going to be providing for this market greens operation. Everything else has remained blank. And I'll show you, I want to point that out now, and I'll show you why that makes sense later. And so here on this sheet, I still have all my crops, all my units, all my values, and I'm filling this out. And our market greens projection was $2,000 to send to market greens. And here in this corner, I have just overestimated by about 10% for 2,261. And that's a good thing. You always want to overestimate a little bit. So this here is our projection, our sales projection for market greens. Likewise, I have a sales projection sheet set up for our farm gate sales. This is the open farm days. We run open farm days once per month, and that's why I got one for June, one for July, one for August, so on and so forth. And then I have decided on what we want to send to these these open farm day market days. And looking at beans on July 21st, we're looking to send 10 pounds of beans to our open farm day market, and 6 bunches of beets and 4 pieces of Chinese cabbage, 4 pieces of green cabbage, 4 pieces of red cabbage, so on and so forth. Our farm gate projection, if I remember right, was $3,000. And so again, at the bottoms, they're all totaled up, and I want to make sure I exceed that $3,000, which I do. Nice work, Mark. Now, again, this here sheet is set up identical. And even though I have absolutely no hot peppers in mind to send to the open farm day market, I still have a line here that represents hot peppers. That's because on our very last sheet, it brings all of these previous sheets together. And again, I got a formula here where it's taken those CSA formulas and adding them to our market gate formulas, and then adding them to our farm gate formulas. I might have said that a little backwards, but I have CSA highlighted now. But anyway, I've taken all of those 3 different sheets, our total CSA with 60 shares, plus our market greens sheet, plus our farm gate sheet. And then I've literally just added those 3 sheets up, and that's represented in this here square. And then again, I just click and drag, and then click and drag, and the sheet just auto fills, and it's just that easy. As soon as you have the template set up, it's just that easy. And again, these templates are available for you. They're right here. All you have to do is copy and paste them and make it your own. And then by adding up those 3 sheets, I have our total harvest targets for the entire year right here. So here it tells me, as far as green beans, fresh green and yellow beans, our total target that we're aiming to harvest this year is 480 pounds. Scroll down a bit, get something different. Cooking onions. We're looking to harvest a whole total of 510 pounds of cooking onions for the entire year. And not only are we looking to harvest 510 pounds of cooking onions for the entire year, but we're looking for 120 pounds on this particular date, which is November 10th. We're looking for 120 pounds. And we are looking for 90 pounds on this particular date, and another 90 pounds on this particular date, and so on and so forth. And so all of our 60 different crops that we had are all listed here. They all have units associated. They all have prices associated. And now we have harvest targets associated. Sometimes they're in bunches, sometimes they're in pints, sometimes they're in pounds. It all depends on the vegetable that you're selling. And then at the very end, it pulls all of these numbers together. And remember, I was saying our gross target is $35,000, but in my heart, I really want to get $40,000. If we did everything following this sheet, we're going to get to $42,300. And again, I like to estimate just a little bit high, and that's a good thing to do. So that's our target. That's our plan to get to $40,000 worth of sales. So the next thing you got to do, well, I'm about to switch off this sheet and go on to the next sheet. Does anybody have questions about our sales sheet? Crazy, right? A lot of crazy stuff. But we're going to keep plowing on here. And this is just the overview. Those 30-week participants in September, October, and November will be developing one of these crop plants. The next sheet is what's called the field planting schedule. Let me kill that one. Move that on over. Okay, so our field planting schedule. So let's start with beans, just because it was at the top of the list. And I'm going back to our harvest target sheet and just kind of refreshing our memory about these beans. Here we have all of our different targets for how much pounds of beans we want to harvest for each individual week from mid-July to mid-September. That's your bean season. And our total harvest targets was 480 pounds. So now we're going to take that 480 pounds and we're going to work with that number over here. This here is our field planting schedule. And so here's beans. We have our 480 pounds. In this Canadian Organic Grower book that I shared with you all, let's try to open that one up. And let's get over to the appendix. This Canadian Organic Grower book has some wonderful appendices that is infinitely handy, and I refer to them every single year when I do my crop planning process, and you guys will probably do the same into the future. These kind of things are available online, but you got to really kind of hunt around for them, so it's super handy to have them all in one spot. That is this appendix here. So we got beans here. So here we are. This particular chart is looking at your direct seeded crop reference chart. And beans is something like green and yellow beans is something you direct seed. You'll notice we didn't start them in the hoop house. You're going to put those right into the ground and seed them right into the ground. This here chart tells you all sorts of good information about beans. That tells you what family they're in, the legume family. Tells you how many days to maturity it's going to take out in the field, 56 days. Tells you how often you should plant beans, every 2 to 4 weeks. Tells you how many rows per bed you should plant. That's good information, right, guys? That's 2 rows per bed. It tells you how many seeds you will be seeding for those 2 rows per bed. Here they recommend 12 seeds per foot, but you're going to come in and thin those later. That's just your 12 seeds per foot for your original seeding. Then down here, remember this here is a PDF, but in the book, this here is a double pager. So it have beans right across the top. So here they tell you your yield, and that's what we were just looking at. And here they tell you that your yield that you can expect for beans is 0.55 of a pound for every row foot, not every bed foot. Because remember, you have 2 rows of beans per bed. So if you wanted to get your bed feet yield, you're looking at doubling that with your 2 rows per bed. So your bed feet yield would be 1.1 pounds, but your per row foot beans is 0.55 pounds. So here on, yep.
Sorry, with those rows, like where it says 2 like rows per bed, does that take into account companion planting? Like would that, Okay.
This book,
And
this book does not talk about companion planting whatsoever. It
Okay.
doesn't mention it at all. That's something that I've kind of baked into my crop plan because I love it. I love to do the companion planting. The first time you go through this crop plan, first time you go through this crop plan, especially with new beginner growers, I always find everybody wants to nail it too hard. The first time you go through this crop plan, you should just kind of do a really simple crop plan. And maybe even a fictitious crop plan, as much work as it might seem, because you need to get that experience. And then after you get that experience, then you can start doing those fancy things like working in companion plants. That's my recommendation. But everybody tries to nail it on their first try. And despite my recommendations, everybody will still try to nail it on their first attempt. So looking back at your field planting schedule here, with beans as our example, we are looking to harvest a total of 480 pounds of beans. Our estimated yield per row foot, we got at the back of that appendix there, and it tells us 0.55 pounds per row foot. We have 2 rows per bed. And here the book tells you to work in something called your field safety factor. And this here tells you, well, if you work through your field safety factor, the book recommends to multiply all of your plantings by 30%. And that's what this 1.3 does. Even though we're aiming to harvest, our harvest sheet tells us that we want to harvest 480 pounds. But by adding in that field safety factor, we're actually aiming for 624 pounds. And that gives us some leeway. If we have a bumper crop and harvest all of those beans, then we either get to give them away to crew or have extra sales or whatever we do. The field safety factor just multiplies everything you do by 30% in order to give you some leeway. And that's an excellent safe kind of thing to do. And that's why it's called the safety factor. So once you know that you need 480 pounds and you know the yield that you can expect and you know your rows per bed and you multiply everything by 30%, next thing you get to do is to estimate how much total bed length you need by using this formula where you take B6 divided by this here D6 divided by F6 and multiplied by your field safety factor, and that gives you your estimated total bed feet length. These here formulas are all available. When you buy the Canadian Organic Grower book, it actually comes with these template formulas. So you could either use the Canadian Organic Grower template formulas, or you can use the ones I have baked in here if you wanted to do this yourself. So here you just calculated how much bed feet that you need. Knowing that you want 480 pounds of beans and using these formulas, you're going to need 567 bed feet available to you to grow that many beans. And so we have 10 field blocks. If you take that and divide it by 10 field blocks, you're looking at 57 bed feet of beans per field block. Here's a category that the book doesn't add in, but I add in just for my reference, and that's how many different plantings of beans you're going to do over the season. And we're going to do 3 different plantings of beans. And here's something else I baked in myself, and that's estimated bed feet per planting. If we're doing 3 plantings, you just divide this number by 3 and you get that. And here, as we work through, we have a category that says that lets us know if we're direct seeding or transplanting. And then this next box is all about your in-row spacing, and we're looking at 4-inch spacing on beans. Here we're talking about families of beans. Beans kind of fall into 2 different families. There you get, some people call them legumes, and fabs are another one, fabaceae. I don't know how to pronounce Latin, but that they're both representative of beans. The next one here, we got days to maturity. And then this here is where it all kind of comes together. So remember on this here sheet, we are looking to harvest beans on July 21st. That's our first harvest date. We're looking for 45 pounds of beans on July 21st. So on this sheet, knowing that we are looking to harvest beans on July 21st, I'll put an X here. What this does is, in order to determine your first planting date, you're going to take that July 21st date equals this date minus your days to maturity, And it tells you what date you need to plant those beans in, given 56 days to maturity. If we're looking to plant these beans on July 21st, and it takes us 56 days, it's 8 weeks, we need to count back 8 weeks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, which means we need to plant our beans on May 26th. Isn't that great information to know?
Yes.
Yeah. And so that tells us now that on May 20, and we're also doing 3 different plantings of beans. Remember we were talking about that, and that's what these are broken up to represent 3 different plantings of beans. And our first planting must be May 26th, and then we stagger our other plantings, and then that tells us exactly how many bed feet of beans we need to plant, and exactly what date those need to get in for. And again, if we were to take that 120 number and divide that over 10 beds, you're looking at about 12 bed feet of planting on May 26th date. You're looking at another 12 bed feet of planting on June 9th date, and you're looking at another 12 bed feet of planting per field block on June 30th date. And that's the way we worked out our field planting date with beans. And we use the same formulas and same figuring to figure out all of our other crops, our shell beans, for example, our whatever, our broccoli, our Brussels sprouts, our Chinese cabbage. That's exactly how we figure out and how we determine when these things are going to go into the ground, by going through all these formulas, by setting up our budget, by setting up our goods and services and our prices, setting up our sales projections, and then we can turn this around and plug our numbers into our field planting schedules. Now, the example that we work through with beans is something that we are direct seeding into the garden. However, if we talk about a crop like, just because it's come up quick here and we're doing it this week, we're talking about a crop like our summer cabbage, our farro summer cabbage, or our red summer cabbage called Omero. Those are things that we were planting out this week. This week is May 5th. And look at, oh my goodness, we're right on target, fellas. Isn't that amazing? And by the time we were done doing all of our figuring and formulas and field safety factors, we figured that we needed 60 total bed feet on the farm in order to meet our sales targets that we set up for ourselves. And 60 divided by 10 is 6. And how much bed feet of cabbage is most people putting in this week? 6. Isn't that amazing? That's where that number came from. It all works out. Cabbage, though, I wanted to talk about cabbage. Cabbage is one of those crops that are transplanted, and that's what this TP is for. So cabbage, you got to do an extra step. Knowing that we want to put it into the field on May 5th, now we got to count backwards to figure out when we got to start it in the greenhouse. And that's represented on another spreadsheet that's called greenhouse schedules, and we will get there. That's a little bit further on, but I just wanted to point out the difference between the direct seeded crops and the transplanted crops. So that, my friends, is our field planting schedule. By the time you're done your field planting schedule for all of your different crops, and the more crops you grow, the more work you got to do. And not every farm grows, 60 varieties of crops, that's for sure. Some farms will only grow a couple of varieties of crops, and this process gets a lot simpler. But for CSA farms, you got to often offer a lot of choice because people don't want to just eat, turnips every week of your CSA. So you got to offer a lot of different crop variety choice when you run a CSA. But if you're a farm that, say, just does a farmer's market, you could choose to specialize in like 5 different things. You could choose to specialize in beans, garlic, whatever, tomatoes, carrots, and those could be your crops that you have consistently every week. And that is a sales strategy that some farms use. Some farms like to be that farm at the farmer's market where every single week you can depend on me for these 5 crops, and that consistency will get you some sales. That's not my style, though. I like to grow a little bit of everything. And every single week when you get to my farmer's market stand, when I used to set up at the Brickworks in Toronto, every single week I would have like almost completely different stuff from one week to the next week, and there'd be no consistency. And some people would complain about that. And some people would roll with that and purposely come and see me this week to see, hey, what does Mark got this week? Because they never know. And I like that. That's my style. But it's all up to you to decide what your style is going to be for you. But the whole point of the field planting schedule is to determine how much bed feet that you need of each crop and what date that's going to go into the field. Not what date that's going to go in the greenhouse, what date that's going to go into the field, whether that's by direct seed or by transplant. We now know how much bed feet for every single one of our crops and the dates that they're going to go into the field. By the time I'm done, I will add up all of these various plantings and it will tell me my total bed length altogether with my salad turnip, my Hakiri salad turnips. I am looking for a total of 100 bed length between all of our field blocks on the farm. Likewise, with cherry tomatoes, looking for a total bed length of only 40 between all of the different plantings on the farm. Squash, total bed length, we're looking for 120 of the vine type and another 120 of the bush type. And at the end here, that's common with all of these spreadsheets. I just kind of pulled together all of the totals to let me know the total whatever that I need.
So is when you're actually determining the amount of like footage that you need for whatever crop, right? Do you have it is it pre-programmed into your feed that there, like, you have so much volume per footage?
Like yield wise?
Yield wise, yeah.
Yep, and that's what I got at the back of the Canadian Organic Grower book, and that's what this category is here. This is my estimated yield per row foot.
Okay.
And a lot of these numbers come from the Canadian Organic Grower book, but my Canadian Organic Grower book that's not in the library has all sorts of notes written down on it. And I will often go back and revisit that and update those numbers to make sure they accurately reflect what's happening on the farm.
And you could hypothetically be able to create kind of like a log of your own, like if you actually wanted to be ambitious enough to go into Excel and create your own Excel form for like how much yield you're having per year. Like,
oh, I do that, Dallas. Right? Don't worry, I do that. I do that by keeping track of yields. When on harvest day, we won't get into that today, but on harvest day, I have a whole other spreadsheet. And on harvest day, as things come in from the fields, we enter how much got harvested, and then that influences my crop planning process for the next year.
Yeah, and that's similar to how, I guess, in a food perspective, like menu planning and like determining how like food costs for whatever you're cooking, we do something similar and figuring out, like, we have a log of based on like how much, carrots are, or how much, whatever is, and that determines how much a dish is specifically, right?
Yep, been there, done that, and you're exactly right. They two are incredibly similar.
Yep.
So I'm about to move on to the next step. Any questions on the field planting schedule? So the next step in the crop planning process, if you're following along with the COG book, and remember, the COG book presents it as very linear, but it can be circular. You don't have to start with the budget. You can start someplace else and work your way back and work your way forward. This is just the very linear COG kind of example that we're working our way through. The next step is, once you determine how much bed feet you need for each crop, you are now going to place those crops into your field block, virtually, of course. And this should look familiar to you guys. This here is field block 2. This should look particularly familiar to Doreen. She's been staring at this one for a few days. And so after I determined how much total bed length I need, I divide that between all of my different field blocks, which is 10, which is easy math that way. And then I try to place all of those crops into my crop map. And as an added complication, I also have, when I do this, I also have open last year's crop map, and I try to not place the same crop in the same place, ideally for a few years, but sometimes it's only for like 2 years. And sometimes, in some rare occasions, I'll push it and plant a brassica in a spot where a brassica was the previous year. And then I'll make a note saying like, oh, this needs extra compost or extra attention because there was brassicas here last year and therefore I might expect some trouble. And sometimes it ends up like that. But ideally, when you're placing your crops, you're doing it onto your crop map here, and you're trying to rotate your crops so they're not in the same place they were last year. And in this step, you're trying to make sure that you have enough physical space on your farm to plant all of the crops that you have just decided on. And if it turns out that you have more crops that you decided on than physical space, well, there's some tools for that. And you guys have already experienced a little bit of that when you've asked me what these red boxes mean. The red boxes mean we are double cropping, and that is a space saving technique. Here in bed 1, we are going to be planting an early variety of potatoes. Those potatoes in theory should be harvested out maybe late July, early August. Then that gives us time to prep that bed again for an August 25th planting of radish. And that's a space saving technique. So when I add up all of my various field block spaces that I need from that previous steps, the space that I need was actually over what was actually available to me in real life. So then I got to get creative and do some double cropping, which means like putting in an early crop, harvesting it completely, waiting a couple of weeks and doing that stale seed bed, re-prepping that bed, and then putting in a new crop. And that is a great space saving technique. So that is your next step. And this here step is actually the longest and most in-depth, confusing part of the whole crop planting process, is placing your crops, doing that crop rotation kind of thing, and making sure you actually have enough physical real world space for all of the crops that you just decided for. That's going to help you achieve your budget target. And there's a lot of fiddling in this step. You're switching crops around, you're moving crops around, you're just trying to physically fit everything in. Our field blocks being what they are, some field blocks are a little bit larger than others, but by the time I'm done, I got to make sure I hit all of these target numbers that I decided on in this step 4. Like going back to like summer squash as an example, our total bed length for summer squash was going to be 100 feet. And I got to make sure I have enough physical space in every which one of my field block to put in 10 feet of summer squash on average. Some field blocks might only have 8 and another field block might have 12. But on average, I got to put in 10 bed feet of summer squash per field block in order to hit these harvest targets, which will help me hit my sales targets. It all kind of goes back to that original spreadsheet. All these spreadsheets build on each other.
Mark, does that book, like in my reading, I've read there's like certain crops that don't do so well close to each other.
Yep.
Like, does that book kind of give you that guidance? So you're like, oh, I'm not going to put my 10 feet of this. No, you just have to know that.
Yep. That's a
Okay.
bit of a trial and error and knowing your crops and that kind of thing. Yep. Unfortunately. The book will only take you so far. The book kind of relies on your experience as a gardener. And I realize some of us might have more experience than others. Some of us might feel as if they have hardly any experience, but that's what we're here for, to gain experience. So that's step 5. And we're not gonna spend much time on step 5 because you guys have already seen all of these crop maps. One thing I did want to point out, and I pointed this trick out to some other folks. Right now, we are currently in the week of May 5th. So another thing you might want to do is use that Control F function to get your find up and then type in May 5th. And here it says I have 29 instances of May 5th. And you'll notice something like peas here, it's listed twice. There's 2 listings for May 5th, but that's okay. But if you wanted to get a quick glance at whatever needs to be planted for any particular week, just enter in that Wednesday date for that week, and then you can just scroll through. And so here, let me go back to number 1. Here is the first planting. Here's the first instance of May 5th on this spreadsheet, which is these cooking onions here. So here if I'm wondering, hey, what needs to get planted on May 5th, or the week of May 5th, I should say, you just do that search for May 5th and you can keep scrolling through. So here I had, let me shift my screen on over. Here I have cooking onion. That's going to be planted at the exact same time as carrots. The carrots are direct seeded. The cooking onions are being transplanted. Here's another planting that's going to be done at the same time on May 5th, and that's your chard and green onion. And then you can keep scrolling through. And the next one here is our peas. That was our shell peas, and those are our sugar snap peas. And then the next one over here is our broccoli. And as you can see, and I think you guys have already figured out how to read this, your broccoli is going to go in on May 5th. And then we're going to wait a few weeks. And then on the 26th, we're going to open up that row cover and we're going to put marigolds down the center. This time of year in May, we can still expect some frosty, chilly mornings. Marigolds do not like frosty, chilly mornings. That's why we delay on the planting of marigolds. But the broccoli go in now and they get a chance to grow up a little bit. And then the marigolds will come in and they'll fill in the bottom underneath that broccoli. Likewise, same thing with green cabbage, goes in now, marigolds go in later. And occasionally you'll have a planting that looks like this, where I have 2 May 5th dates here for beans. Again, this is in field block 2. There should be, beets, I should say here, sorry. Beets in field block 2. This is a companion planting that I've been working out over the years, and where beans and beets grow well together, but the beets need a head start. And so we start those beets down the center of one row down the center of this bed on May 5th. And we will be planting a total of 12 feet plus 22 feet, so 34 feet total this week. And then in another couple of weeks, we will put in one planting of beans on May 26th. And then the week after, we'll put in another planting of shell beans on June 2nd, and those will go in afterwards. So sometimes you will see that something needs to get planted now down the center of a bed, and then those other plants will be planted in later around it. And that's just timing wise for a companion planting that we're working on. And then you can keep scrolling with that May 5th date, and then it just pulls up every single May 5th date that needs to get planted. And likewise for next week, we'll be into a May 12th date, and you can just type in May 12th, and then you'll get all of the different plantings on May 12th. And it actually looks pretty light next week. Look at that. You only got like, only lists like 9 here, and some of them are double listed. So May 12th next week looks like a little bit lighter planting of a week. So that is your crop maps. Any questions on the crop maps before I move on? After the crop maps, I start thinking about my seed order prep. The reason we do the seed order prep after the crop map is because we need to do that crop map step in order to make sure we have enough bed space to plant all of our crops. If we don't have enough bed space to plant all of our crops, then we have to consider shortening some of our plantings. And then you make that tweak, and then you do your seed order after making those tweaks. You don't want to do your seed order based on your field planting dates because you don't know if you have enough real world space to plant those at that time. So you take your field planting dates and you virtually plan your garden. And then knowing that you have enough space to put all these things in, now you can proceed to your seed order. One more thing I want to mention on this crop map before I move on, and I think I pointed this out to a couple of people, and I've probably a couple of other people have already figured it out. But this here is like an exact, well, not an exact, but I try to get like a map, a visual representation of the field blocks, and every single individual square represents 1 foot. So your beds roughly are 3 feet across, and that's why there's 3 squares here going this way. And then this here first planting of potatoes is 25 feet, and you'll notice it matches with this 25. And yeah, that's how all of the crop maps are set up. It's in the GIS world, it's what's known as vector maps. But that's fancy pants stuff. We won't get too much into that. But this here is like is a virtual representation of what actually goes on in the field. And something else I mentioned to a few folks is even though my numbers here are exact, that's just kind of the nature of working with computers and the nature of working with spreadsheets on computers. But when you go out to the field, if you only planted 24 feet of potatoes instead of 25, it's not the end of the world. If you plant 30 feet of potatoes instead of 25, it's not the end of the world. And sometimes I might even mismeasured the bed. If I flubbed the bed, I mismeasured it by 5 feet, and your bed's actually 5 feet longer than what this represents on this map. It's up to you as a grower of what you want to do with that extra space. You could put in extra crops. You could put in some flowers for pollinators. It's up to you to decide those kind of things. So don't sweat it if I think it was Faith and Tom last week, or in field block 3, there was one bed that I messed up and there wasn't enough space for 3 6-foot plantings. I think there might have been only like, I don't know, maybe 15 feet of space. And so I was like, okay, what do you want to do? Do you want to take that 3 feet out of your last planting, or do you want to shorten all of your plantings? And again, this is up to you as a grower. And don't sweat it if you change it a little bit, because you got to remember, every field block is just 1 out of 10. And if one field block ends up being a little bit longer or a little bit shorter, it's not going to throw off our numbers that much. You're just 1 out of 10. And so it's okay to not match these numbers exactly. Another thing I should point out too is I deliberately try to build in some spaces here or there. And that's because some crops like these cabbages will need to be row covered. So it's nice to be able to have a little bit of space to bury in and deal with that row cover. And it's also just nice to have a little bit of space built in, just to give you a little bit of breathing room. So again, as a grower, you can decide that, hey, maybe I'm going to fill that space with more crops, or maybe I'm going to leave that space in order to bury the row cover, or maybe I'll use that space to plant some bachelor buttons that the flower and fertility crew has started. So don't sweat these numbers exactly. They're just made there. They're just there in order to give you some guidelines. They're not meant to be exactly.
Hey, Mark, for
Yes.
field block 8.
Yep.
I probably, I don't know if you could just do it right now and show me how to do it, but remember we put parsnips in there, but it wasn't the Harris model, remember?
Mm-hmm.
So how would you change that? We put the
Very good.
Gladiator.
So the first thing I would do is do my Control F feature, find those parsnips. And here it's showing me parsnips are way down here. So this is your May 5th parsnip.
Yeah.
Okay, so I had in mind planting Harris model. This is the conversation Emilio and I had yesterday. And all of your field blocks, I had in mind these Harris model parsnips. And that is what I ordered when I placed my seed order. But then we got a donation from West Coast Seed Company out in British Columbia. And in that seed donation that we applied for as a nonprofit, and they give seeds to nonprofit farms such as us, and they have a program there. And in that donation from West Coast Seeds, they sent us out a different parsnip than that Harris model parsnip. The parsnip that they sent us out was called Gladiator. And so Emilio and I talked about that, and we decided, yeah, man, go with that Gladiator in field block 8. I have never personally grown a Gladiator parsnip myself. So that's kind of like a trial now for us. I would like to see most field blocks with that Harris model, because that's what I'm familiar with. I know it does well here and it's dependable, but let's try this Gladiator. Who knows? Maybe it'll even do better than that Harris model, and maybe we'll switch next year to all Gladiator. And so if you decide to make that switch for like good reasons that we just talked about, it's great that you can come in here to this crop map and make that switch and update that from the Harris model parsnip to a Gladiator parsnip. And that way we got these notes for the next year. Thank you, Emilio.
No problem.
Okay, so looking at our step 6 here now, this here is our seed order prep. So knowing that we can physically space X number of bed feet of beans into our gardens, and you'll notice my bean numbers have changed. They've changed from placing everything into my crop maps. My numbers have changed a little bit. They've tweaked in order to physically place these crops. And that's why we're doing the seed order now, based on these actual numbers that are going to make more sense than the numbers I was first projecting, which were kind of best case scenarios. So now we have, after we're done placing our crops, our numbers have changed slightly, and we are looking to order in. So that's all bed feet. Okay, so here, after going through that crop map process on this here sheet, our total bed length changed from whatever it was previously to now 254. We are looking at having 2 rows per bed. We are looking to seed 8 seeds per row foot. We have a built-in safety factor of 1.3. And here again, we're using a safety factor of an additional 30%. So when we order in seeds, we actually over order by 30%. And again, it's nice to have a little bit extra than to run out and be short and then try to scramble to buy seeds at the last minute. That sucks. So here, it does the math for you. It multiplies these numbers together. If you're looking for 254 bed feet, 2 rows per bed, 8 seeds per row foot, and an additional 30%, you need to order 5,283 seeds. I know exactly how much seeds I need in order to make my crop maps happen, like to the seed number. Isn't that amazing? Now, some seed catalogs will sell you seed by the individual seed count number, and it'll say that you're ordering 5,000 seeds at a time or 200 seeds at a time or whatever. But that's kind of rare. Most seed books sell things by the gram and by the ounce. And again, at the back of the Canadian Organic Grower book, it has a category. This is how much seeds per gram you can expect out of your beans. For every gram, you could expect 4.2 bean seeds. And those are the numbers that we're using here in these. Well, I use 3.7 because I won't get into that. But just from trial and error and keeping my own notes, I noticed that 4.2 is a little high. So I've reduced it to 3.7. And so here we change this number into grams and into ounces so that when we're ordering from seed catalogs, we can order either by the seed count or by the gram or by the ounce. It tells you exactly how many grams you need and how many ounces you need. And that's how you do your seed order. Of course, when you do your seed order, you're not just ordering beans though, you're ordering specific varieties of beans, Provider or Rock Door or Jade or Goldilocks or whatever bean you happen to be ordering. And so here I break, yep.
Where do you buy your seeds?
Because we are running out of time, let's go to that sheet. Well, let's put a pin in that for a second. Here's your seed order where you're taking your actual bed lengths that you determine that you have. You're using some of these numbers at the back of the Canadian Organic Grower book. You're determining exactly how much seeds you need by the count, by the gram, and by the ounce. And so this here sheet tells me exactly for all of my individual crops, those 60 crops that we're growing, it tells me exactly how many individual seeds I need for each crop and how many grams and how many ounces. So then your next step is to then actually physically order those seeds. And here is that sheet. On this page, I have them listed by seed company. And I've ordered some from Annapolis Seed Company in Nova Scotia, ordered a particular tomato that I wanted, a short season Canadian variety of tomato from the Cottage Gardener. Ordered some from Richter's in Ontario. I used to be almost neighbors with Richter's. I'm very familiar with their operation. Fruition Seed is for another specialty tomato. Gaia Organics was another specialty tomato. Groundswell is for specialty indigenous corn variety. Hayes Farm saved all of those individual seeds for various crops from squashes and lettuces and various things that we are saving our own seed there. High Mowing Seed is another company that's from Vermont. Hope Seeds is from the Maritimes as well. Halifax Seed Company, Maritimes as well. Johnny's is from Maine. Heirloom Seed Solutions was a specialty variety of indigenous squash called the Canada Crookneck. Turn Soul, who are the authors of this Canadian Organic Grower book that we're looking at, and those are the seed companies I ordered from this year.
Okay, thank you.
So basically, I've taken all of these numbers that we've determined in our seed order counts, and then now I went and hunted down all of these various seeds from all the various seed companies. We won't get too into depth about that, but that's just broad strokes. That's what we did there. What I do want to spend a minute on is this greenhouse worksheet. Remember, I was telling you about that cabbage example. That cabbage transplant was set to go, if we wanted to harvest a full head of cabbage, and I'm just kind of picking a day out of the air, but if we wanted to harvest a full head of cabbage at late July, we counted back our days to maturity, which is listed at the back of the Canadian Organic Grower book for all of our vegetables, that days to maturity. So we counted back our days to maturity from end of July, and it told us that that cabbage needs to be planted this week, May 5th. But that didn't take into account our greenhouse days. And that's what this greenhouse sheet is all about. This greenhouse sheet lists all of your greenhouse crops and only your greenhouse crops. Your direct seeded crops are not on your greenhouse sheet because they're not started in the greenhouse. So with cabbage, and that was, let's go with that farrow cabbage as an example is what we've been working with. If we want to plant 60 bed feet for May 5th, such as we did and such as we are doing this week, again, at the back of the Canadian Organic Grower book, they have a transplanted crop reference chart. And not only do they tell you the days to maturity on this page, but on the next page, they tell you your greenhouse days, your recommended days that you're going to have to start these in the greenhouse ahead of time. And here we have cabbage, and cabbage they list at between 28 days and 42 days. So that's between 4 weeks and 6 weeks. And so on my greenhouse sheet, what did I list it as? Greenhouse days. I split it in the middle and listed as 35 greenhouse days, which is 5 weeks. Yes. So on May 5th, we want to plant that. That's this week. So counting back 5 weeks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It should have been started around the week, the last week of March there, around that May 31st date. So that's when we should start it and have it in the greenhouse for those 5 weeks and then transplant it out in May. So that's your example with cabbage, but I mean, the same thing applies to all of our greenhouse crops. If we wanted to put out, here's a Chinese cabbage, if we want to put out a Chinese cabbage next week for May 12th, and again, we have 35 greenhouse days, we count back 5 days, and we started those in and around that first week of April for May 7th, or April 7th rather. And that's how that greenhouse days sheet works out. And so for every single week right now, especially this time of year, right now we are on that May 5th week. Every single week I'm going in here and looking at my black squares, and that's how I determine what seeds need to be started this week, is by looking at all these black squares. So this week we were supposed to start Brussels sprouts, but we actually got to that a little bit early last week, if you remember, and we started our Brussels sprouts. And likewise, we're supposed to start some marigolds and some amaranth. We started a lot of these last week, so we had time on that rainy, wet Friday. But anyway, this here greenhouse schedule keeps you all on track for every single week of the growing season and lets you know exactly when you should be starting your seeds. Because eventually we do have some fall harvest, fall crops that will go in. And even in as late as June, we are starting more lettuce seeds and for that late June kind of date in order to achieve a fall harvest. Lettuce, we will start our fall lettuce in and around that week of June 23rd. It will go out to the fields on July 28th, and we are looking for a harvest, probably into September on that at least, if not a little bit longer maybe. So that's your greenhouse schedule, and you can see how all of these sheets build on one or the other.
Mark,
And then,
do you account like for the amount of space you have in your greenhouse? Like, because you know how you're talking like bed feet. So like, what if you like need all these seedlings, but then you don't have enough greenhouse space? Like, do some people calculate that, or?
I suppose you could. I don't worry about it because we have a very large greenhouse with lots of planters. And even so, we are maybe running out of space on the planters, but that's not a big deal because then we just started in those seed trays. The planters is always my first go-to because I don't like to use the plastic. But if we need to, then we end up using the plastic.
Okay.
But yes, you can determine how many like trays of seeds that you need to start. Like I said, as you go through the Canadian Organic Grower process, and I've been teaching this for over 10 years and operating it for longer than that, you kind of tweak it and make it your own. And I found I don't need that step so much. But there is a step in the Canadian Organic Grower book that will let you know how many trays of seeds that you need to start, because they're assuming that you're using greenhouse trays. And then you can determine based on how many trays of each seeds, you can total that up, and then you can determine how much space that's going to take in your greenhouse. And then the final step, that as far as I take it to anyway, the Canadian Organic Grower book goes a little bit further, as I was explaining earlier, but the final step is to bring it all together in a field operation calendar. I've showed you guys this before. This field operation calendar I have a tab for each of our field blocks. And then I have all of the beds listed for each field block. Here we're looking at field block 2 again, it has 8 beds. I have listed in my notes column, I have listed what crops are going to go into that bed. And then for every week of the growing season from April 28th all the way into October and beyond, I have exactly what needs to get done in that bed in order to keep us on track. From early in the season, such as we've been doing, is a lot of bed prep, getting those beds in shape. And then as it moves on, then you got some planting notes, and so on and so forth. But that's where this all kind of comes down to, is this field operation calendar. Once I have this field operation calendar done, my crop plan is complete. Because Hayes Farm is as complex as it is, with our many field blocks and many different crops and all of our field blocks, this probably takes me like a good month of like full-time computer work to complete in the wintertime. At my former operation, where it wasn't as complex and I was able to group more things together in bigger areas, it probably took me a good solid week. But Hayes Farm is a little bit more complicated. We're set up for more educational than like churning out yields, and that's fine. Yeah, once you're familiar with this process, you can expect a good like solid 9 to 5 Monday to Friday type week to complete one of these crop plans. But when you're first learning it, it's probably going to take you twice as long at least. And yeah, that's my takeaway on this whole thing. And that, my friends, is the crop planning process. We're a couple of minutes over 4, so I think I should wrap it. Anybody have any questions about the process? Any feedback? Is it insane? What do you think?
My mind is blown. So much respect. Yeah.
And again, like, people were doing this kind of stuff just analog and big binder spreadsheets once upon a time before these spreadsheets became available.
It's a lot, but I feel like I'll get the hang of it eventually.
Yeah, and you don't need to necessarily know how to do this at this point. You just I just want to familiarize you with how we determine what goes where and why and when and all those kind of things. And that's the whole point of this. I just wanted to walk you through that Canadian Organic Grower book. You're welcome to read through that PDF on your own time. We got a couple of hard copies if you want to dive in a little bit deeper. But that is the process. And believe it or not, the majority of organic growers that I know are using something, if not like this, but something very similar to this, especially if they're managing a CSA. You don't have to manage a CSA for your farm. You can just, like, I know some farms that do very well only managing just a couple of crops, and they might have just a couple of harvests throughout the season, and that's how they make all of their money for the entire year, off just like a big garlic harvest, let's say, or a big raspberry harvest, and that's fine. And you might not need an in-depth crop map. But if you're planning to run a CSA or a farmer's market where you need X number of dollar sales per week, this is the process. This is how you get there. This is how you sleep good at night. All right, we hung in there a full 5 minutes overtime. If nobody else has anything, then we're going to wrap it. We are back online tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. So overnight, if you have any more questions, write them down and we can revisit.
Thanks, Mark.
All right, fellas, we're out.
Have a good night.
See you guys.
Nighty night.
Have a good one.